Hello everyone, this is Neil Bedlin with the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. I'm the Chief of Interp, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today on our third Centennial call. Today we're going to be talking about the Strategic Communication Plan, but before we get started I want to do a quick introduction of the staff that is here with us at the Lewis and Clark Trail in Omaha, Nebraska. With us today is Ryan Cooper, Carla Segala, Superintendent Mark Weekly, Dan Wiley, and so we are all here in Omaha, and we wanted to get things started with this communication plan and have this discussion today. I also wanted to thank everyone for joining us and to also let you know that this call will be recorded. The previous call, the Centennial call number 2, is also available on our YouTube page, and so this call will also be available there too. So pretty much what we wanted to do today is kind of discuss the communication plan and discuss with our partners in the visitor centers and people along the trail how we could communicate better and increase the opportunities to amplify our message. And so throughout our time on the trail, we've seen a lot of great successes in communications along the trail, but primarily most of the communication has been local or on a regional basis. And so what we want to do and what we've done is worked with a 502 Media Group to come up with some ideas for collaboration on a regional basis. And this collaboration and actual coordination of a message helps amplify the message across the entire trail. So while we may be saying or sending out social media here in Omaha, someone else along the trail, let's say in Seaside, Oregon, may also be sending out a different message. And if we coordinated those messages and created some synergy and help with that, the message will be heard further and be more effective. And so that's why we've worked with 502 Media Group on this. And I'm going to go ahead and just introduce them and hand it over to them. And so today with us we have Blade Mages, and he's with 502 Media Group, and Christopher Alexander, who is with Pigment Communications, and they've developed the communications strategy for us. Christopher?
Great, thank you, and thank you everybody. Basically what I'm going to do is run through this plan and talk a little bit about how it works, and then sort of talk more about how we can implement it and kind of what are the steps. Because as Neil pointed out, the real purpose here is to create a mechanism, and this plan is part of that mechanism, to get everyone working together so that we're maximizing time, resources, and messaging in kind of a focused way. So I'll run through this, and I'll make it somewhat brief so that we can have more discussion rather than lecture. And there we go. Sorry, but I'm sorry. Real quick, is my box, this go to webinar control panel appearing?
No, just your screen.
Great. Okay. So what did we do? So this is kind of dual purpose for today, and what happened? What do we perform? What services for the trail? We conducted a comprehensive review of what was happening and kind of how it was happening, and from that we built really, I guess you could say, a strategy. This came up when we first briefed this in Omaha versus a plan. A plan sort of implies on Tuesday you're going to do this, and we didn't drive something down to that level for two reasons. The first one is you have a whole host of stakeholders who have different interests and are parts of different organizations, so we don't want to be directing things in that sort of sense. We want it to be collaborative, one. And number two, we wanted to create just kind of a left and right limit, a guide rail to use so that everyone has something to kind of fall back on to keep some unity of voice and message without being overbearing. Because at the end of the day, we want to enable the enabler. We want to grow communication capability with all the stakeholders together. Real quick, what were kind of the challenges? These were primarily identified out of the Omaha office and were kind of constraints for us. Understanding strategy and communication activities was a start. There's a lot of schools of thought on how to do this, and part of the reason why I'm going to spend some time explaining our strategic communication plan is the methodology that we chose, which might even seem counterintuitive at first. As the people here listening know, you have a very diverse stakeholder audience. We have everything from tribes to state agencies to local tourism boards to the federal government and everything in between. Future resources were an issue. We weren't sure necessarily what's kind of coming down the pike and what we may have for the development of creative. And then the last one may be why I may or may not have spoken to you if you're on this call, depending on what kind of a stakeholder you are, and those were OMB research constraints. Very, very briefly, if you ask more than 9 people the same question, if you're the federal government and they are not a federal government employee, you have to have special clearance. So we could not ask a whole, everyone we wanted to speak to in the stakeholder universe about what they thought and felt as we built this plan, but that is something that we did, and I'll cover that. And so we talked to, ideally we wanted to hit about 81 people. So there was a bit of a limitation. We couldn't just mass blast out questionnaires or do phone calls. So if we didn't talk to you in that regard. So the plan, the purpose of the plan is, as you can see, increase public interest and attendance in sites. We want to help generate greater sustained interest in the trail, writ large across the country. So we did some messaging and some pieces that I'm about to cover for you. This was accomplished, though, and this is what's so crucial, by bringing you, the stakeholders, on board and getting some buy-in so that we're executing this sort of loosely defined plan together. We looked at a 2-phase approach to communication, and for us this began with really what this is the first of, and we hope to be more a strategic communication working group. Outside of the kind of management talk, what is that? We want to create kind of a think tank, a gathering place where we can talk about best practices, we can look at different capabilities, and we're kind of hoping that we'll find some synergy perhaps where partners can work together to accomplish things, and that could even be in terms of resources. So the first phase is getting this working group running. A little bit more about it, as I said, we want to strengthen that stakeholder team and figure out new ways to work together, because the real experts aren't Blade and I in this. The experts are the stakeholders, the people here on this call. Talking about this plan that I'm going to go through, I believe everyone had a chance to look at it. You may not have. It's not a big issue right now. Frankly, the important thing is to sort of understand the why behind it, because you're going to have future discussions about this plan to kind of make it your own. So this was done not in a vacuum. We had conversations with a number of stakeholder groups to try to understand a little bit more about what your concerns were and some key things that you might care about to this. But again, let me just talk about this framework. I apologize for having to get a little bit academic. I'll make it brief. So this plan starts essentially with an end state. And an end state is what we want to achieve. What is success? What does it look like, a year from now? It then breaks down, and it's what we call it's nested. So we then develop the kind of messages that we needed to reach that end state. That's that point out in the future. So we worked sort of backwards, and again, that can seem counterintuitive. And we'll have a practical demonstration of this. Then our end state is broken into smaller pieces, and then we get all the way down to some messaging recommendations. Again, we'll see what that looks like. So, what is an end state? It's what the plan achieves over time. Again, this is this counterintuitive aspect of it. We're gonna define where we want to be in the future, and then we're going to work backwards from that point to today. an effect ends up being a component of the end state, and when you see this broken down in the actual plan, if you haven't noticed it already, you'll see it almost sounds sort of repetitive. That's very, very deliberate. You know, we want to make sure that everything we do is part of this coordinated effort. It's also very, very helpful when you're doing metrics to have these sort of repeated pieces because of the way you can weight them. Continuing on, we move from an end state to effects, which are more broad, and then themes begin to focus down. So we're talking about a specific audience. We're talking about something that we're trying to achieve kind of within the plan, if you will. And then finally, it breaks down to really to tactics. And in this case, what we did was we did talking points that could be used in different manner. And the last metrics, I'm not really going to cover that a lot today because I don't know if there's a lot of resources to do it. I'll touch on it very briefly, but what we're able to do is quantify, and there's some correlation and causality, and for people into that, you probably can ask a question, but suffice it to say, we try to quantify the influence that we're having, and then we trend it over time against a baseline. And I'll leave it at that unless there are questions at the end. One very important thing to think about in metrics, regardless of whether you use use them heavily in the program or not, what I've seen a lot of, and I have a background in government strategic communication, is a tendency to confuse how hard we tried with how well we've done. So, we put out 148 press releases this year, and we did this, and they're all performance measures. Well, did anybody read it? Did we see a news outlet pick it up on the social media side? Did we see likes and followers? Effort is not success. It's just effort. And so I do want to point out that that's always something to consider, whether you're deep into any kind of a metrics type effort or not. All right. So we used kind of a 4-step process, and this plan that I'm about to present really is most effective when it kind of works that way. It's an iterative self-refining process, if you will. What does that really mean? Okay, and we've done part of this already. Obviously, your input's going to be great to continue to move through these iterations, but we want to define the problem. And we define the problem, we want to understand the audience, we want to understand the platforms that we have to reach the audience, and of course we want to understand our own organization, ourselves, and what our constraints are to achieve that. From there, we develop a solution. Obviously, we implement, and we're kind of in that in-between right now, between develop and implement, if you look at this cycle. And that's why we're having this conversation now. And then finally, we want to measure it. Oh, I'm sorry. So ideally, what can you do with this plan that we've presented? When you have an intern, when you have less experienced staff, when you're in a rush, you can refer back to this plan and you can find polished talking points, polished themes that you're able to incorporate into whatever you're doing, whether it's just taking the talking points and using it as Twitter fodder and putting a couple of those out every day to kind of get that critical mass of 5 tweets per day, or whether you're preparing a statement, copy on a website, whatever it is, you have some polished communication that you're able to, words, positioning that you're able to use that keeps some kind of discipline, kind of uniformity of messaging for everyone. Again, none of this is mandated, no one has to do it, but what we'd like is your feedback so that we can finalize a document like this and people do start making use of it. And it's something that is already working in the NPS office in Omaha. This ability to sort of cut and paste and pull things out of the document and use them. And again, I can't emphasize this enough, that the idea is that we're just repetitive in our messaging, so we're discipline focused. There's a very noisy information environment. You're competing against a lot of different things. We'd rather not be competing against each other. The more you see similar messages, again, we don't want to have some kind of weird straitjacket blueprint, but the more that people are able to see this messaging from all these different entities, the better chance we have that stuff's going to stick. And that's just, we think one of the most successful strategies we're going to have in communication. So you can see here's the end state. I'm not going to read it off. I will just say that these things are all proposed, and we want everyone's feedback because that's how we're going to get everyone's buy-in so we can use this. But I think it's pretty straightforward. And by the way, we came up with this part of it in conjunction with the existing kind of mission of the trail and discussions with Neil and Carla. So we have 4 effects. The first effect, and this I will read just because I do want to make sure that we cover some things on this. Inform public and stakeholders of the historical heritage of the trail and where to experience it. Again, hardly earth-shattering. This is not, by the way, when I talk about things that you're going to cut and paste and use, something that you're going to use. What this does, though, is it just keeps us moving, or helps us kind of understand the directions that we're going to head in. Next, we're going to talk about the recreational opportunities of the trail and where to experience them. So 1 is historical heritage. You can key on that. 2 are recreational opportunities. 3, the natural history experience. And finally, kind of a diversity and awareness, underserved demographics. We felt that was something that was important and actually warranted its own focus area on the trail, whether it's urban or minorities or others. So you see these 4 effects. They break down from that that end state that I presented, and that's just kind of the guide rail that we want to be on. And of course, we think that covers it. The discussions that we had, that seems to be the range. If this seems off, we want to know and love to hear about it. Sometimes it's a matter of semantics and just involves some explanation. Sometimes it's just wrong, and so we're more than happy to hear feedback and critique from that. Now, as I said, it keeps breaking down and breaking down. So now we're going to get from our effects into messaging. And as I mentioned, we have this whole nesting idea. So before we get that last bit of messages, you can take a look here at the color coding, how everything nests together. So each of these effects supports this end state. History heritage, you see it in our end state, so on and so forth. The purpose for this is kind of a mental exercise so that 2 things happen. 1, you broadly think about everything that you're doing in a way that's a little easier to explain in that short period of time you have to communicate it, 1. And 2, if there's something on here and there's a great idea, it should fit here. If you have a Twitter campaign or an Instagram effort, or if you are running a program and you want to talk about it to the press, if it doesn't cover the historical heritage, the recreational opportunities, the natural history, or help with attendance and awareness and diversity, okay, 1 of 2 things is off. Either perhaps you want to rethink this program that you're using and why. Again, not that the merit of the program is at fault, but why you're talking about it, or the plan's bad. And in one iteration, we made a few changes because we realized we really weren't considering one aspect of it. So that's the purpose of this this whole nesting idea. Again, it's kind of a thought exercise to make sure you've covered your bases properly. So now I'm going to go through just 1 theme. You have the full plan that's been presented to you, so you can look at all these. You can see it's detailed, and I want to point out it may look a little overwhelming at first when you look at this, but this is it's detailed. It's not difficult, and by that I mean well, the end state's the end state, but start at the themes. You want to talk. You have a natural history program. Look at your natural history themes. Find the theme that works for you, and then or effect that works for you, and break it down from there. So once you're comfortable, and it's pretty intuitive. Once you're comfortable looking at the plan, it's a really invaluable resource, and Blade will actually address that. So themes, the trail tells the story and heritage of the country as well as the expedition. You could potentially use the theme, by the way, by itself to communicate, but then we have actual messages. And again, they're open, they allow a lot of room. At the same time, you have this ability, as you can see, to use these in a number of different ways. So this plan breaks down end state, effects, themes, messages all the way through, and you're able to track each of these down. Key external audiences. So this kind of touches on that fourth effect, if you didn't notice. But these were, when we did some target audience analysis in our discussions, some groups that we thought may merit special attention. And that can be in terms of tactics and platforms. A lot of these, as you can guess, are great with social media. The other may be how you want to frame some of the things that you're communicating. And I apologize, we've got 4 audiences on here. But the first is millennials. And that may sound like a no-brainer. I just want to touch on one point with millennials that sometimes surprises people. They're the largest generation in U.S. history. It's a staggering number, and they're coming into their own now in terms of purchasing power, the way they do things. And the one thing I want to say about them to kind of focus some of your thought about them is they curate their own content. The days of I got to watch what's on TV because it's on now are over. They don't watch commercials. They're not necessarily impressed if there's a little NBC peacock in the bottom right corner. They'll watch a shaky YouTube video of someone from their iPhone if they like it. So you have a lot of opportunities because of this sort of change in consumption habits. And so that's, I think, great when you have more of a grassroots approach. School-age children, there's starting to be a shift. You know, depending on the demographer, some people say 1980 is the birth year for millennials. Some people are moving forward. You know, a new generation hasn't shown up yet, so it hasn't been named. If you remember, you had Generation X, and then they kind of had Generation Y, and you know this progression to millennials. So the millennials haven't quite cut off, but your demographers and social scientists are beginning to see a different and a new group emerging. I wouldn't put a lot of time in them now, but don't assume that the 10-year-old that's coming in is going to be like the 25-year-old, and I don't mean the age difference either. You know, there's an emerging trend there. Specifically, you know, millennials are the first digital natives, so there's some newness to that. And school-age children, Generation Next, and by that we mean kind of elementary school. There's nothing new and spectacular about it. This just simply is. And so they're kind of, you know, if you think of Generation X as a bridge between, you know, having only, you know, 4 channels and no remote control, and someone curating their own content at the other end, you have something new that's coming around the corner. But I don't think it should significantly affect any communication activities for quite some time. We notice exercise enthusiasts, and this is kind of a component of millennials, really like the idea of combining things. So we saw some polling data. It was National Park Service data, and the idea that you're kayaking and enjoying the trail, or you're doing some kind of fitness activity, biking, fishing might be a little bit. I mean, you get hike to fish, but this idea of kind of putting together the National Park Service and the historical aspects and a physical activity is something that's really, really popular. And then when we looked at women and minorities, we found one very, very interesting audience that's underserved and really is kind of low-hanging fruit, so to speak, in that they would be a great group to communicate to and encourage. And those are recent immigrants. Recent immigrants, the polling data we looked at, have a great interest in the outdoors. They typically have lower incomes. So you kind of have this perfect opportunity to take advantage of essentially or nearly free resource in most cases. We talk about the internal audience. That's you who we're here talking to today. Every stakeholder that can communicate we think of as internal audience. And I know that definition of a stakeholder and who you are may vary based on your organization, and we discovered that in Omaha. But for the purposes of this communication effort, you know, it's essentially one team that's communicating. So yes, again, I understand we have a lot of individual entities here, but we think with some collaboration, there's no reason that there are bars to working together. We want to enable you, the communicator, as best we can, and this plan is the start of that, to try to start figuring out what can we do, you know, together in a uniform and disciplined manner. So the Strategic Communication Working Group. This is essentially the first one, but I think this one's going to be a little longer than usual. This is really the core of what's going to make this work, because this is how we understand that there's an interesting, food truck that serves food along the trail idea that's happening in one state. I think it's something we talked about in Omaha, and another program that's happening somewhere else, or perhaps even an opportunity to share costs on something and have more resources that can be brought to bear on a problem without a greater expenditure. This is what we're hoping to have happen. At the same time, there's two kind of important caveats. It's really fun to think of exciting creative tactics and programs and play Hollywood producer. The problem is that you have really interesting meetings that absolutely nothing gets accomplished in. So if you find that you have a creative idea that you want to discuss, or if you find that someone in Washington State and someone in Oregon really want to have something they want to work on, it should be identified as a sidebar and moved on. And the idea is that Carla and Neil or the NPS people will kind of help facilitate that quick handoffs so that you guys can talk separately. Again, the point being, we don't want these to drag on, and we just want to warn that you can have really interesting calls that last a long time and are completely fail to accomplish anything. So the idea will be that they'll run with a pretty tight schedule. So this is kind of a quick overview of what we found in discussions with stakeholders. We had some ideas coming as complete strangers to this problem about what we might run into, and my background in government, I thought the first thing people would ask for was budget, honestly. And to my surprise, that really was not the case. There was a lot of discussion about just having a more coordinated and synchronized effort. We were very impressed with some of the creative ideas. Not that we didn't expect those by any means, but there was some really creative concepts that people were talking about, and with all of that time and expertise that each of you have, it's really no surprise. This whole enable the enabler idea was very popular. Many of the people we talked to said, yeah, I would love to have some way to get a better handle on what other people are doing, what's working, and see what opportunities there may be to collaborate. A couple of things jumped out of us in terms of more creative tactics, and also this was backed up for the Native American experience side from the polling data we had. But the Native American experience is something that keeps coming up. It's something the public, when polled, said it's something that really interests them about the trail. And many of the people we talked to said that events that talked about the Native experience were popular, or they wished that there was more opportunities to do something related. Reenactment also came up as something that was a very popular option, and something that we saw a lot of stakeholders wanted to see more of as well. So again, for Blade and I, and he's going to jump in here and start talking about creative tactics in a moment. We were kind of struggling. How do we break down the trail in a way for us to think about it as outsiders? And we thought that was important because the public's got to have a very simple explanation of what is the trail as well. And so we think this is a great this means that we have here is a great way to think about it in a kind of a strategic fashion for communication purposes. It's water, it's trail, and it's road. Those are the three things that again and again and again came up, and we felt that everything into those three pieces. As we talk about sharing resources and trying to work collaboratively, we had to have this kind of a breakdown, because we can talk water, we can't necessarily, and if we're talking about, say, NPS support, NPS can't do a tailored California, Oregon, shoot water, or have photography of every single spot on the trail if we want to talk about a kayaking, boating, canoeing experience. It's just not a practical means of doing things. So we found that by breaking it down to water, trail, road, it makes it a lot easier, kind of a framework to think about how you might be able to collaborate and share resources. Very quickly on metrics, I mentioned correlation and causality. Again, unless someone specifically asks about it, I'm going to spare you. How do we do it? How would one do it? Polling, analytics from the internet, focus groups, and surveys. And what we do is we trend that over a baseline. One thing that all of you can do, and I know that social media is a huge component of how you communicate. You can look at trending over time, likes and shares and those sorts of things, and be able to look and get some best practices. I think it's easy enough to find things like it's always better to have a picture and those sorts of guidelines just about anywhere. But keeping track of what works and doesn't work, even if you just throw it on a spreadsheet or just even make a note, you'd be amazed at what you'll find. Lastly, this framework, again, not quite a plan, right? We're not talking about what you should do every day, but this strategy is just that, a strategy. It shouldn't be changed frequently. If you're changing your strategy all the time, you're in really, really big trouble, right? You set a course, you take some time, you see how it worked, and then you make corrections. So I do want to point out that the plan should be refined and finalized, and then it should go for a while being months, not days or weeks, because it's very difficult to gauge what's happening on anything in terms of effectiveness in just, say, 10 days. These are what metrics can look like. What we do is we take the effect, and then the reason why the effect always has an action verb, and that is written the way it is. That seems, if you notice the verbiage seems a little strange on these. This is actually why. It's so that we can work out a means of measuring everything, and also kind of mix and match and weight things. Here's another example. Wanted to make sure we covered polling, surveys, and of course analytics, which are probably going to be the main thing that everyone here can use on a regular basis. So with that, I can bring in Blade, and Blade, just let me know. I think it's my screen, so I'll forward the slide.
Yeah. So can I just switch that over? Is that possible?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Please.
Let me do that here. Hang on. Neil, are you working on that, or does that have to happen on your guys' end? Ah, there we go. Cool. You guys see this okay? I'm going to go ahead and leave this not in pretty form for just a second here, but can you see both these windows?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So basically kind of building on what Chris talked about. Chris kind of talked about how we started, where we started from, and got us to this point of having a plan, or better put, probably a framework. And really, what happens after this, and what happens after today, and after we presented it from the first time, is kind of up to everybody individually to an extent. And that's kind of what the purpose of the plan is to do, is to give us all some guide rails to work within. And so what we did to kind of button up the plan that you guys will see towards the back half are just some ideas for creative. And basically what we're getting at is not that the ideas for creative are necessarily the exact recommendation of what the NPS should move forward with doing. I think they would be good suggestions, but rather what we're trying to illustrate with that is the process of how us as a creative agency could work with this type of document to produce results that fit in line with where the trail's trying to go as a whole. And so individually, some of you are government, some of you are non-government. You're going to have various partners that come in. You're going to have various new staff or what have you. What we ended up doing with this towards the end of the project is very much a great real-world example of what anybody could do with it. when presented. And so the best way I can kind of try to show you guys that is just go through a couple of the example ideas we put together. But before I jump into the actual creative ideas themselves, wanted to show specifically how we landed there. And so Chris pulled up Effect 1, Theme 1A, which was the trail tells a story. The trail tells the story and heritage of the country as well as the expedition. And so we took an idea like that, we took a message like that and said, okay, well, what are creative ways that we could start to do that? And so in that plan, you'll find these kind of suggestions such as a new website or microsite. And then later on through the document, we show specifically how what we're suggesting is directly linked to the strategic themes and messages. And so the idea was that, in this hypothetical case, the NPS didn't come to us and simply, kind of blindly say, hey, we need to build a new website. We don't know what we want it to do. They came to us with a set of goals to tell the story and heritage of the country and the expedition, or to showcase that the Corps was diverse with fascinating characters. And so what we did was we built out these ideas that were really kind of based on that. And so in looking at the website specifically, I think this description you guys can read into a little bit more in depth from what we're suggesting. But if you look at things like what Find Your Park is doing, they're making it much more about. First off, it's a very dynamic experience, and it's also a very unified experience. So we've the NPS has gathered all of that information and centralized it onto this kind of one website. Similarly, if you really look at the trail, you guys are a 3,000+ mile ecosystem of so many different opportunities for people, and unfortunately, a lot of that information currently is really fragmented. So, for instance, if you jump on Google and search Lewis and Clark Trail, half of the search results are just private companies trying to make a buck off of selling maps or trying to sell, so that there's really nobody controlling any of that information. And furthermore, in the same way that the National Park System has a website dedicated to explaining all of the various national parks, there's no reason that down the road the Lewis and Clark Trail could not have its own website explaining every single stop, explaining road, water, trail, broken into those kinds of ideas, because there are so many opportunities within this one singular ecosystem for people to do. So looking through, let me see if this will change here for me. There was a couple example sites that we kind of pulled just for reference. Belize had a very dynamic website that kind of showed all the different ways you could experience Belize, and that's kind of what we were getting at. But again, getting back to this idea more specifically, that these are all of the ways. And again, I don't want to read this all word for word, but for instance, here we go. Here's how we connected a new website to Theme 1D, which says that everyone can experience the trail from their home, their car, a hike, or from a boat. So we came up with a very specific idea for the website that says, by providing an interactive mapping tool, the website can highlight all the various ways to experience the trail. You could have blog type articles that highlight trail activities or specific points of interest, and that would then create shareable content that can go out to that millennial group that Chris was kind of talking about. And so again, the idea is not that this is the website we need to build verbatim. The idea is that we take these themes and then let this kind of provide a framework for the projects or the messaging, or really specifically the tactical level approaches to solving some of these communication challenges. We outlined a handful of ideas in the plan, and as you kind of get down through there, definitely read up, and happy to field any questions on it. Another one, though, that we thought was an idea that when we saw these themes coming together that talked about needing to promote diversity, needing to show how different the trail is from place to place to place. And then one more stakeholder-leaning goal is to get a tool in the hands of all of you guys that's consistent. You know, the story that we're telling from a interp center to a, you know, a local community visitors bureau to, you know, maybe it's even just a private landowner. You know, all these various stakeholders that make up the trail, it'd be great if, you know, they all had one universal tool that they could use. So we looked at all these various, you know, kind of ideas, or rather messages, and came up with, you know, why not do a trail magazine? Something very, scoot up here, something very image-based, that looks a lot like, you know, anything you might see, more from a lifestyle type magazine. I'm sorry, my computer's on the fritz here. You know, again, showing the road aspect of it. You know, the centerfold spread could be, you know, how to drive the Lewis and Clark Trail, or it could be, you know, 10 day trips from a major metro area that lets you experience the trail, or what have you. So again, the idea here is not that the creative suggestions that we kind of put together, and again, there are several more in the document itself. Not that these are necessarily the silver bullet or the perfect answer, but let's take this into a hypothetical situation, and let's say that instead of us being an agency, we are actually the part-time intern that got hired to work underneath Carla and Neil. All that Carla and Neil would need to tell me is that, hey, you know, Blade, for the next month, we want you to work on something that helps us tell the story and heritage of the country as well as the expedition. And here are your messages you can use to tell that. And I would now have all of the framework that I need to go and take a stab at trying to put together a project like this, or obviously on a much simpler level, to build out an Instagram campaign or a Facebook photo contest, or things like that. Because I have those rules, I know where I can kind of safely play, and then further, I know that, you know, on the other side of the trail, on the other end of the country, there are people playing within those same rules. So overall, the trail as a whole can start to work to communicate better, whether that's through services provided by contractors, or whether that's through, you know, the brand new staff person or intern that just, you know, kind of walked in on the job day one. Everybody is challenged with communication. Everybody is charged with that task. And so having this definitely gives us a couple of walls, which honestly you kind of need to come up with cool ideas or fun ideas that are going to engage your visitors. And so the kind of red section of the plan talks specifically about a handful of ideas, and then attached towards the end are very specific examples. We go into a little bit more detail about each of the suggestions that we had, and kind of what to look for or what moving forward. But I think, again, the more important takeaway from a creative standpoint is not so much that to take these things as the gospel, so to speak, but rather to take the process and understanding the process that we went through alongside the National Park Service in getting to where we got, and obviously soliciting that feedback from you guys now, so that, you know, making sure that the group as a whole understands, you know, A, what we were trying to do, but then more importantly, B, how to use it in moving forward. So,
great.
Yeah, these are just, like I said, a couple of examples, and at this point, Neil or Carla, is there anything specifically I missed or Chris missed?
I thank you, Blade. I think you hit it pretty well. I think we want to kind of open it up for questions right now. And let's see. One of the questions we had was about millennials, and how do we know that we're truly targeting millennials? Christopher, do you want to hit?
Well, yeah, and Blade, I love your take on it too. And I should point out that part of why Blade and I like working together is we come at this from you know, two different sides of the profession, so to speak. I tend to be more on the data-driven side, and Blade tends to be a little more on the creative side. So I'll start. from a data perspective, I think there's some things you need to consider. One are platforms. You know, Facebook is for old people now, as my teenage daughter likes to tell me. So doesn't mean it won't work. All I'm suggesting is, you know, one, you should look at what's going on right now in that younger demographic. And my teenage daughter has, at this point, probably hundreds of billable hours for clients where I've done that. And that's just sort of actually kind of keeping your finger on the pulse of things. One. Two, some general things if you want to know that you're dealing with millennials. You know, I highly recommend Pew, Gallup, and a couple of other people, polling agencies, publish, you know, polls, you know, poll results all the time, and take a look at those, even for topics that might surprise you. You know, for example, political campaigns. There's a lot of talk about the environment, and one message that is now not the best a choice is kind of the save the planet messaging, and by that I mean literally those words. I don't mean environmentalism. You know, it's an idea that's been kind of worn from a pure advertising perspective, and I pulled that out. I want to say it was out of Pew. So how do you know? You know, it's a combination of feel, unfortunately, and just going out and talking to them. But also, I think you can look at platforms and how they're being used, as well as look at some polling data to get a feel.
Great.
Yes, the only thing I'd pick up with on that is kind of once you identify those platforms you're going to make an approach with. You know, like Chris said in the beginning, you know, the millennial generation is not one that necessarily watches ads, so to speak. But if you guys can work to position yourselves as content providers, this is absolutely the generation that eats it up. And so, you know, detail out, you know, provide for free ideas on a perfect day trip. If you live in Omaha, Nebraska, here's a great day trip idea for you to experience the trail, and literally, you know, start here, drive here, and give that away. The more content you can give away, the more it starts to position your brand as one that understands the values. The kind of the theory of reciprocation is a big thing with the millennial generation. It's kind of one of those groups that if you give us some things, we'll in turn give back. You might not always see that day one. Obviously, some of those things take time, but the more you can give away in terms of content, and maybe substitute that for what you were maybe planning to do on a traditional quote-unquote advertising campaign. Content's really, and it's definitely becoming a trite buzzword for sure, but it really is. It does hold true that you know, I mean, looking at kind of some of the magazine suggestions and stuff that we put into here, you know, it's 10 great things you can do. It's lists and it's ideas for how to experience things. So
yeah,
and I would add one thing. I think it's Marriott who's doing it, and I think Blade's actually done a couple of these projects. But web TV, you know, 22 minutes on NBC, the production costs alone are probably more than the entire combined budget of everybody sitting in the room right now for communication. But doing a good quality 5-minute serial and throwing it on a YouTube channel, you'd be amazed. You know, those niche things that everyone's interested in for millennials, that's again going into how they curate their own content. They're going to watch, they're going to subscribe, and they're going to interact with it.
Great. That's we had a comment come in about the importance of posting things on YouTube and submitting recreational opportunities and events, and having the local stakeholders post those things, and it's important to share that too, to get that out there.
Yeah, the selfie stick terrifies me, but it's your friend. You know, people love to share this stuff and participate, and it goes back to Blade's point about reciprocity.
Yeah, just don't run with the selfie stick. Just want to let everyone know, if you have questions, raise your hand on your screen or send it via chat, and then we'll address it here. today. One of the things, we had a question come in, and it says lots of great ideas, concepts, and approaches, but are there budgetary limitations to consider? And so I guess I could answer that. I do think obviously budget is something we need to consider, and it is very important. But I also think we have opportunities to start where the budget may not be the primary focus or a concern. So one example would be is after we establish this working group is to come up with, I guess, selected dates or months to work on a certain theme. And so this theme could be, let's say, in the month of June, we could have a focus on trails, and then we'd have a certain hashtag focused on local trails along Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. And then in July, we could have a focus on water trails, and then in September, something auto tour route. So anyways, it's doing that coordinated effort, a very basic coordinated effort that doesn't cost much, and that's to help start things up. But then as we go along and as this working group is developed, we will have to look into budget more and look at how things could be done. I will say some of the creative ideas that Blade brought up, we are looking into annual reports, and also an annual report, but then also the website. As our last Centennial call, we had a long discussion about National Geographic Sustainable Tourism website, and so that it all fits in necessarily together. It all works together with the website and finding different tools and mechanisms to get the word out. That's kind of what this whole communication strategy is about. I'll look here and see if anyone has any other questions. Anyone raise their hand? And if you raise your hand,
in the meantime, Neil.
Yep.
I just wanted to add, and again, and for me too, believe me, the tactics are certainly the more fun and interesting part. But you know, please don't toss the plan into a cabinet and not look at it again. I promise you, you have this large unwieldy beast, and every time you want to look at a tactic, just take that quick step back and say, okay, what do we want to achieve with it? And make sure that you've got something that's linked to the direction that you want to be headed in. It's an even bigger problem when larger budgets come in and you have all kinds of things happening at once. So just a reminder, keep everything synchronized together, and you're going to be more successful, and it's going to be a lot less painful.
Okay, great. Do we have any more questions?
I'll ask it. As an individual, where can I get a copy of the plan? It was sent out with the invitation, and it will be uploaded to
our website.
Mm-hmm.
Currently, our website's being updated to accommodate mobile access, and so please check back within a week or two, and we should have that information updated on our website. But it was also included, the communication plan was also included with the email that was sent out. There's a link on there to that.
But I can also email it individually if you didn't get it. So just
Right.
send us an email and we can do that.
Right, and actually that brings up a good point. If you're interested in the communication plan and would like it and you don't have the email, please send us an email or respond back to the email from the call, and we'll get you one. But I guess now is the time where we want to put out a call for anyone that is interested in helping and being part of this working group. We definitely don't want this to be an Omaha based group. We want a group of partners along the entire trail willing to help make the effort to move the communication plan forward and come up with creative ideas of how we do it. So if you're interested in doing that or participating in this working group, please send Carla or I an email or respond to the webinar email that was sent out. Let us know in some way that you're interested in doing it. Send us a chat right now, and we'll move forward and have our first working group meeting here in a month or so.
Neil, Carla, if anyone has a question that stumps you or is specific, feel free to email us, and we're happy to jot down a quick response.
Okay.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
That'd be great. Let me check and see if there is any more questions.
Are you going to set up the website? But I already answered it.
Okay. I don't see any more questions. Then we'll go ahead and conclude today. I want to thank Blade and Christopher for giving us a great presentation on the communication plan. And we're excited about this, and we appreciate their hard work and effort going into this and reaching out to all the partners along the trail to really invest in this, to get a good understanding of where we are. And we're excited about the future of this. But again, I want to reiterate, we're not able to move forward unless we have buy-in from all partners along the entire trail. So that concludes our third Centennial call. If you have any questions, feel free to call us here at the office. Thank you very much.